My name is Michaela Haywood. I'm going to be covering Chapter 4, Race, Historical Oppression. So the first thing is a racial impression in our national story. So our issues of racial oppression affects our educational context such as literature, sociology, psychology, and history. So one example for literature is To Kill a Mockingbird. That story is taking place during a time where racial oppression is very, very prominent. We have the main characters, one of the main characters, Atticus Finch, who is a lawyer, basically protecting the rights of a black man who is being accused of a crime that he did not commit. And so a lot of our literature that we have today is focused on past events, such as segregation. As you can see in the picture, we want white tenants in our white community, so things like that also takes place in To Kill a Mockingbird. We see that even though the main characters are white, they don't really have that much interaction with black people because that was how it was during the time it was written. And a lot of our history is also the same way. We get to see how it was before the present. So our history relies on us asking questions and making connections between our lives in the present and the lives from the past. And so if we're thinking in that contents that we're trying to make connections between the now and the used to be or the then, or as teachers we have to keep that in mind as we are building our lessons, formulating our curriculum, and so forth. We want to make sure that we are not erasing or excluding any of the past. We are trying to make connections between what we are doing now to what happened. For instance, an example is I taught 1984 in my junior English class, and we made connections between how technology was perceived then and how technology is perceived now. We didn't see a lot of racial oppression in that book, but you still get the sense of someone is being oppressed in that book. Going on, this chapter also focused on ethnic diversity. So as you can see, we talked about different ethnic groups: Native Americans, Latinos, Hispanics, African Americans, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and Jewish Americans. So if we are constantly trying to make connections between the past and the present, it is important as educators that we understand the past of our students, depending on their cultural backgrounds. So Native Americans, they have a very complex history that has yet to be extensively studied by some people, and by some people I mean educators or pretty much educators or anyone. There isn't a lot of foreknowledge or back knowledge about the hardships Native Americans had to face when Columbus came to America, and how he misnamed Native Americans and so forth. So as teachers, we have to keep that in mind when we're thinking about the material and how we are going to teach it. Say, like, you're teaching history, you don't want to say Indians to your students because that is not the correct term. That is it's misnamed Native Americans, and you want to make sure that students understand and connect with that so that you're being respectful to anyone's culture in the classroom who may identify as Native American. Same for Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, and Jewish Americans. Latinos and Hispanics also have a very complicated history as well. They were also colonized, and so forth. Like, their community is very diverse, along with Asian American and Pacific Islanders. That community has several ethnic groups to form their community. I can just list off a few because there's definitely a lot of them. One second. So we have Asian, Indian, Chinese, Filipino, Indonesian, Japanese, Korean, and so on. So that's just to name a few. We also have Filipinos, and those are some of the more prominent ones we might see within our classroom. That doesn't mean they're the only ones we see in our classroom. And so in order for us to be more open and understanding, we have to recognize that there are some questions or some remarks that we may make that may offend our students. Same with African Americans. Most African Americans have roots in Western Africa, and some African Americans don't even prefer to be called African Americans. So you kind of have to gauge and have that relationship with your students to understand what they prefer to be called within their ethnic group. Same with Jewish Americans. They have experience with Anti-Semitism, which is prejudice and hostilities against Jews. It used to be a really huge thing. As I've been within the educational system and even, going through school myself, I never really noticed anti-Semitism or have noticed it. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but that just means as an educator myself, I need to be more aware of my surroundings and make sure that my students aren't affected by anti-Semitism or being made fun of or anything like that because of their religion, whether they're Jewish or any other ethnic group, or part of any other ethnic group or religion. So this chapter mainly focused on, race and then the historical oppression, but I really want to emphasize that is something as educators we need to have in the back of our mind when we are creating our lessons and our curriculum. We never want to make our students feel like our classrooms are not safe spaces for them, or that who they identify as does not matter, because it definitely does. And in America, we're so diverse that we shouldn't be making people feel any different just because they are different from ourselves. So yeah, that was pretty much my takeaways from chapter 4 and what I feel we need to change as educators. We just need to be more aware of all the cultures within our classroom. And I'm not saying that we need to be well versed in these cultures, because that would take a really long time, but we do need to make an effort to understand where our students come from and how we can accommodate them within their means in our class.